Yeah.
sense.
Just it was interesting, Matt, as you're talking about 10 years ago and the experience in the industry. I was an engineer in college and was originally going to be an engineer. And became a loan officer and that was became my career. But long story short, I actually in 1999 had built, actually won an award for the best internet telephony speech product at the time. You could call in, you could have it read you your emails, your texts, give it you sport, give it quotes. So this early part of having this voice assistant, what's different today than has ever been different is the accuracy of voice recognition and the ability for the AI to understand contextuality. So like you said, it used to be you're trying to build a decision tree. Well, here they could say maybe these 25 things, and voice recognition wasn't that good. So you can only maybe really listen to 25 key things. And if they said it something different, you had to think about all the ways they could say it. And if they said it something different or they had a longer question or a pause, well, you couldn't pick it up. Today, it's just like talking to a human who will actually listen the whole time for you, right? So I think that's the big difference is it's the ability that you can actually recognize speech at a super high level and it can understand the contextuality. So it actually, so now you can actually really use it in, prime time to actually make real communications. That's why.
Cool. As far as adoption, what I've seen, first off, I'll tell you because I've heard so many times over the years, and Josh, you mentioned that there's like a theory that everybody assumes that they want to speak to a human. You start off a conversation, and you have people saying, speak to an agent, agent, representative, like on the phone and all of that. But I've always looked at it a little differently. We think that we want to talk to a human because we've been more successful in the past with that. We've realized it wasn't a good IVR. It didn't get me what I needed. So it's really, the main reason why we think we need to speak to a human is really more about our own expectations of what the machine, the human to machine experience is going to be. If you start to think about the trade-offs as a user, you're like, I just want to speak to a human because I want to get this done. Well, if you say, well, you're going to have to wait, 8 minutes for a human, or the machine could do it right now, they're probably going to choose the machine because they don't want to wait. So there's lots of things that I think. So my point about this is really adoption is adoption is growing because the expectations are going up and we're meeting those expectations. So they're having a better experience. And they're saying, well, wow, I tested that and it actually worked. Now let me take it to the next step. So we always will hit points where the machine can't, it hits its limits. But I think that's a lot of what is driving that adoption is just that people are being successful with it. And so they continue and they'll come back.
When you look at statistics, I mean, let's not forget 72% of home buyers say that like the number one thing that was their determining factor in which lender they went with is who they thought they could trust, right? So trust is still absolutely critical in our industry, and you don't want to take the risk of implementing technology that could potentially undermine that trust, right? In addition, 86% of home buyers said that they enjoyed working with a loan officer, right? So loan officers who do what they should do, right? To your point, who are empathetic, who are understanding, or to communicate in sort of common everyday language, the complexities of mortgage, like there's no threat to them at this current moment because they're meeting borrower demand. So, but for me personally, yeah, I mean, I use ChatGPT every single day. We use other various tools. Where I found it super helpful is things like in an editing capacity, not so much a generation capacity, although the promise there is getting better, right? The graphics are getting a little bit more stable. We can ask it to generate charts off of data, and they're usually pretty reliable. Sometimes they need a little finicking to make them right. But something like, we write a post for LinkedIn and run it through for a quick proofread, just make sure we don't have typos or just major logical errors. You know what I mean? It's really good at that. And so there's a lot of use cases for lenders, even beyond sort of the direct customer interactions that I think are exciting.
I think with voice and kind of in this theme, I think people want an always on, always accessible, and always available culture. And like, we want that with everything we're buying now, right? And Amazon, I can wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and if I want to buy something, I can order it. I might even be able to have it at my house by like 5, like within the next 2 or 3 hours if it's in my area, right? So if I want support, I want it in the middle of the night. If I wanted to ask questions, so I think, back to where voice AI or just where AI and conversational AI is in general, it's at a place now where it can actually provide that always on, always accessible experience that your customers want. And they'll know that it's not you, a human, but they may have a question at 10 o'clock at night. Well, they're like, I wonder what would happen if I offer price went up by $10,000. What would my payment be if I could get a different rate? They may want to be able to say, hey, 10 o'clock at night, can you tell me what the payment would be if I did this and this and this, and have someone come back and say, here's your new payment. Here's what the new rate would be. Or yes, you would still qualify, or no, you wouldn't qualify, right? Because they want to be able to transact whenever that. So I think we're going to see AI. I mean, just in general, AI is, going to displace a lot of things. It's changing, people, the question is it going to replace a loan officer? Well, it's a really interesting way to look at that. I mean, yes, it is going to replace loan officers, but it's not going to replace all of them. It's just going to replace a lot of them. What that means is the average loan officer in 5 years is going to be able to do 2 or 3 times the amount of volume they're doing today. Just plain and simple, maybe even more than that. And if the average loan officer can do 2 or 3 times the volume as they're doing today, well, we don't need many more. We need fewer loan officers. So yes, it's going to replace loan officers, but it's not going to replace a loan officer in that sense that there are no loan officers. There's just going to be a lot fewer because volume is going to be, people be super efficient. So I think that's what we'll see.
I think a lot of it is making sure that you're going about this in a way. I mentioned like mitigating risk, before, really having a smart way of designing like guardrails for the AI. So if you're using like generative AI, making sure you have guardrails so it's not going to go far afield, hallucinate, and say something to your customer that's embarrassing to your brand. Having a set of really like AI principles, like guiding principles of how you do these. And this is, you could probably ask ChatGPT and they'll write them for you. But, it actually really is important to kind of just have as a brand, have your head on straight when you go through this, so you can avoid, negative or unintended consequences at the end. From a technical perspective, I would just say, in general, as the category of voice AI or AI in general, I think one of the big threats is just bad actors and people using the technology for, bad reasons, whether it's fraud, from a banking perspective or whatever. So that's one of the biggest hurdles is how do you, do this well as your brand, but also in the bigger scheme of things, trust is lost when, you get a fraudulent call that might sound, because of voice cloning, might sound exactly like a family member asking you to transfer some money. So there's just, in a bigger sense, it's like there's just a lot of, a lot of concerns and fears, and that like the hurdles are almost like ourselves, a society, making sure that we make good decisions with this and kind of protect the space so we don't lose trust.
I think Matt kind of hit the nail on the head early when he talked about so we've had sort of automated telephony for a while now, and we've seen customer behavior shape around that, right? Where they've come to recognize it very quickly, and they like as quickly as they can, they like try to figure out which number is it that they push on the keypad to get to a human, right? And so as we see the proliferation of more automation, more self-service, more voice AI in the mortgage industry specifically, I think all that it's going to do is drastically dial up the value factor of when a borrower is actually able to communicate directly with a loan officer or processor or whoever it is that they're working with who's a human, right? It's not lost on me that Discover, for example, is running nationwide ads already promoting the fact that they provide
The
24/7 access to live human agents, right? That's not a voice AI. I think there will be opportunities for lenders. I'm not saying that they shouldn't embrace voice AI. I think they should for all the scale reasons that Josh just talked about. But I think they need to be very selective in when they pass that customer off to a loan officer and not back off on training those loan officers to be absolutely exceptional at what they do. And especially as they're augmented in the way where they're not having to crunch as many numbers or, like be in as many different windows at the same time, like you talked about earlier. If they can focus on quality of conversation, building trust, building relationship, providing value, differentiating who you are and the lender that you work for from the rest of the competitors out there, that's going to become critically important, because the other side of this coin, if you will, about how voice AI will shape customer expectations is that more and more Americans are going to have an AI of some kind in their pocket, and they're going to be dialoguing with it about, well, is this really a good deal for me? Should I buy a house now? Should I continue to rent? What should I do? Right. And so loan officers are going to have to present a value prop that's going to be able to exceed, right? And yet in some ways align with, or at least very critically distinguish itself from the type of advice that they're going to be getting from these mass models that, we don't know how they're going to be educating customers. So I think there's a lot to consider on that front, if that makes sense.